And joining us now here on the Jay Stevens podcast, it is Adam Armbrecht. I had to ask him prior to recording what his last name was by the fist bump and how to pronounce it. It looks like I got it correctly. Adam, how you doing today?
Fantastic, man. Knocked it out of the park. Listen, it rolls off the tongue. German origin. It's never an easy one.
I love it. Love the humor, man. Glad to have you here with us today. If you could, just very quickly, let people know where they can connect with you via social media, then also some of the shows you're doing as well.
Yeah, first and foremost, for these purposes, the Locked On Nets podcast, you can follow us on Twitter under that. Find us on any podcast platform at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter as well. And then if you're looking for some Giants content, I'm an East Coast guy, so the One Giant podcast, also searchable on all the social media and podcast platforms. That's where you find me.
Nice. Very quick, very busy man. And I'm sure you have been enjoying watching this Brooklyn Nets team play basketball this year.
Yeah, to say the least. It's been listen, it's funny because to come from a place I'm a Jersey guy, so I watched them going back to those days, all the way back into the Kenny Anderson days, early 90s, through the Keith Van Horn high socks wearing days. So it's been a labor of love to be a Nets fan. We had some highs in the Jason Kidd area, obviously, but it's different, man. Even these last couple of years where, the D'Angelo Russell era was nice too, because it was fun and exciting. Even the last couple seasons were fun and exciting. These guys are surprising you. Now it's fun because on almost every single night, you just kind of sit back and say, all right, what's this going to look like? What is James Harden going to do tonight for us? What is KD going to do? What is Kyrie going to do? So it's a different mentality, but man, it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure, and just for people that are out there that are just like, I want to watch some good basketball. I want to watch some of the best players in the NBA watch basketball. They're going to tune to the Nets before most teams in the Eastern Conference, because you have Kevin Durant, you have Kyrie Irving, you have James Harden, and those three together, they can do a lot of crazy things on the court individually. You put them together as a unit, it can be pretty scary.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because the Eastern Conference, right? The hierarchy, Philadelphia maybe is getting their act together this year. Doc Rivers seems to be exactly what you want, a coach that knows what he's doing. But, they've been hit or miss the last couple of years. Boston seems like they're having their own struggles this year. Milwaukee still has their question marks when it comes to the postseason. So there's not this catalog like the Western Conference where even though the Clippers came up short, but it's the Lakers and the Clippers, and now it's the Jazz this year, and the Nuggets were good, and the Memphis Grizzlies are exciting, and they're all talented. We know the Eastern Conference we run a little thin as you get down the hierarchy. So you're right, quality basketball in the Eastern Conference for sure. And then you mentioned it too, the quality of the play. And I hope I don't gild the lily here on any questions you were going to go with, but the difference of how Harden is on the Nets versus how he was on Houston also creates a different style of play that is much more pleasing to the eye. I was not a big James Harden in Houston fan. It's not good basketball to me. And that's true about a lot. The NBA right now, there's times when I'm like, man, this is not good basketball. As exciting as three-pointers are, fundamentals is something that I still like to hang my hat on.
Mm-hmm. I'm right there with you, man. James Harden in Houston, I got a buddy who's a Rockets fan, and he's trying his hardest to get me to be like, Jay, it's the Rockets, man. It's James Harden. I'm like, okay, Brian, I don't care. I don't like that basketball at all. You may like to come down, shoot the three, or, he travels a lot. I'm not going to lie. He does travel, or does a little push off with his arm to create the contact, but it goes on the defender. He does a lot of things that are tricky, but he's playing within the game. He knows they're not going to call them. But his brand of basketball in Houston, I didn't like it either.
No, man. And it's funny. It is funny. You mentioned the push off. That's one of the things that I do notice. We don't get into it too much because everybody has those moves. You mentioned the traveling. I feel like don't watch the NBA game too closely for that type of area because the little carryover moves and everything else. But when you say that push off arm, you start to see it consistently when you're watching a player every single night, and he likes it, and he likes to go to it. And it's basically, it can be a coin flip about, are the referees going to look at that and be like, hey, you're pushing off in this game, we're going to call it or not? And if it's a not, then that separation piece out at the top of the key is beautiful. And if they do start to call it, the nice part is that Harden can go, all right, fine, so I'll blow past you instead. I don't have to use it. If you're going to let me, I will. But if I got to pivot, I can go to another trick in my bag.
If you could, very quickly, not focusing on Harden or Durant or Kyrie or any of those three, the team in general, how would you describe their play in this year so far?
Yeah, it's getting to a level of consistency now. So, early on, obviously pre-Harden trade, it was about, okay, let's find our rhythm now with KD back on the court. First time officially on the floor for the Brooklyn Nets. You had Kyrie just coming back from a 20-game sample size. That's the last time I'll mention them in this response. But the team overall, when you look over the roster, you got a handful of guys that have been here. So, and we just spent an episode where I really went into TLC and his performance. Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot. It's been pretty brutal to watch him of late. But when you think about guys like, they traded away Karis LeVert, you still have Joe Harris, a player like Jeff Green got brought in this year. A guy like Tyler Johnson was there in the bubble for them last year, though. Bruce Brown's another addition. Shamet's starting to find his rhythm. But what we've seen over the last, I'd say, at least solid 3 weeks is all of these role players are starting to find their niche, right? What do I need to do to be in service of the big three? So as they start to identify those roles with more confidence, you're also seeing, by the way, rookie head coach Steve Nash, right? He's figuring out some things as well. So last 3 weeks, I feel like this is now a team that has a rhythm, has an identity, has role identities as well for individual players. And I'm very curious to see how they come out of the All-Star break, because obviously you haven't had KD these last a week and a half or so now. They gave Kyrie one night off with a shoulder. Maybe they're going to move that all the way to the All-Star break. So now it's really about, give me this one more sample size before I really start to turn my attention to the postseason. And that's saying all 3 stars, all fully healthy, the entire roster at your disposal. How dangerous are we?
You mentioned 2 things there. I'm going to go one by one, kind of piggybacking off of what your response was there. What is the identity of this team?
Oh, they're a come chase us. They are a get out and get after you fast and early. And then let's see, do you have the firepower to come after us? The defensive component of this, and that's, listen, around the NBA, they were belabored about that for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, and as any Nets fan will tell you, you go back and look at the schedule. This is all about that Detroit Pistons game back on February 9th. This is going to be the date in Brooklyn Nets history, because after that, every response from every player was it was an embarrassment. Detroit's not a good team. We can't play like that, etc. They came out and gave you performances against quality teams over an 8-game win streak that showed you, when necessary, when we decide to put our effort and energy into it, we can be a strong defensive team in spite of lacking some size. So as long as they establish the early offensive dominance, and they're going on a historic pace here this year, then it just, listen, name the team, even the best of them. Guys have 2 superstars and 2 superstar offensive talents. They don't have the third. So once you get that 10 to 15 point lead, it is going to be incredibly difficult to fight your way back, especially if Kevin Durant's out there on the floor and his length and the defensive ability that he offers you. So that's they're a kind of put their foot on your throat early and then see if you can pry it off. And that's how the establishment of this flow has been, unfortunately, up until that loss there on Saturday night against the Mavericks.
Number 2, piggybacking off of that other response, who are some role players that are stepping up right now?
Oh, well, Bruce Brown's the easy one. I mean, good Lord. This guy, they got him playing at a pseudo 5 role. He's been absolutely a beast. He's done everything that the coaching staff has asked of them. And then speaks to the mental acumen. I just think that he knows basketball. He understands what his role is supposed to be, and he understands how to play off of specifically a James Harden, because he's been now the point guard. He's running the show there. So he's been really good. It'd be easy for me to say Joe Harris just because he's a phenomenal 3-point shooter. But again, he found his rhythm very early with Harden, so that's benefited him even more. He's having a career year in terms of percentages from beyond the arc. It's weird. Those might be the biggest 2 that I would point to. And actually, I almost skipped over him, and that's Uncle Jeff. Jeff Green has been fantastic as well. They've asked him to play some 5, and then he really gives that little bit of length. And again, veteran presence, veteran leadership. So those 3 players have easily, I think, been the most reliable in terms of role players supporting the Stars.
I think Jeff Green gets kind of overlooked easily, no matter what team he's on. Because
I almost did it.
Yeah, it's just like that. First part of the season, Jeff Green's there if you cover the team, but it's like, what is he doing? What's his emphasis? Like, what's his role? And then midway or right before midway in the season, you're like, oh, Jeff Green is here, and here's what he's here to do. And it's the same way here, other places throughout his career. He's kind of that guy where it's like, especially now, he's like, first 20 games, trying to get my feet under me. Like, at least stay young, stay nimble, like stay flexible. And then this part of the year, 30, 40, 50 games in, you're like, oh, it's his role. and he's very vital to the team's success, especially when they're trying to make a playoff run.
Yeah, no, and you mentioned that piece there about early in the year. This was not, Jeff Green was just kind of there.
Yeah.
He was just on the roster, and he was getting some minutes. And again, there's the piece of figuring out how everything comes together. But it was just, we kind of looked and said, yeah, veteran. Okay. Nice veteran piece. Good to have him on the roster. And then same thing over the last 3 weeks to a month, he just started to increase his role. He lives right in the range of give me about 7 shots per game. He doesn't overseek it. He doesn't stay on the ball longer than he should. He keeps it moving out of his hands, makes himself available in the lane specifically for James Harden. I mean, we've seen him, by the way, we've said it a number of times on the podcast. I didn't know Uncle Jeff could do it. I didn't know that he had the ups. I mean, he's shown some real athleticism is such a, absurd word to use for an NBA player, but driving the baseline, getting at the basket. He has the defensive effort. I'm not going to call him, a stopper on the defensive end, but he gives you that length as well. So no, 100%. He's worked himself into form. And I think that is one thing that Nets fans have had to adjust to as well. You got to remember, you bring in these veteran guys, they get what the big picture is here, right? So you're not necessarily going to get the hustle and heart of a 22, 23-year-old right out of the gate. You're going to have to allow them to work themselves into form. And in a short season like this, that timeline even gets pushed back a little bit more, I think.
Yeah, effort, defense. It's today's NBA. All you have to do sometimes is just give a little effort, get in front of the guy a little bit. He's going to pass the ball because it's like, oh, there's somebody in front of me. I'm not used to this. Here, take it, hot potato.
Well, it's brutal, man. I've talked about with other guys around the NBA, Matt Brooks, who works for Nets Daily and does some great articles and film study. We had talked last year about Donovan Mitchell, who coming into the league, everyone was like, well, the best thing is he's a two-way player. He's going to do it on both ends. And then you kind of get conditioned away from that, right? You end up leaning into your offense, and especially you're on a team with Rudy Gobert. So, hey, he'll take care of kind of the legwork there. I can focus on this end of my game. And you start to wonder, well, are you teaching it out of the player? And the fact that it is a pure effort aspect and so few players are willing to commit to it, it is frustrating. It's frustrating. There's a difference between a guy like James Harden defensive effort versus Kyrie Irving. James Harden has the presence, has the physical body. He can take on a guard and actually D him up and keep him in front of him, those kind of things. Kyrie Irving, and we've seen this over the course of this season, he's the guy that other teams are calling out, getting the switches on. They're attacking him on the defensive end. Now, you live with that because you know what he's giving you on the other end, but there's a difference there. And a frustration sometimes when you go, oh, so you can do it. So just do it. Just do it all the time. What are we talking about here?
It's easy. It's easy to say that, but it's like they're making millions. They're like, I don't want to play defense. Let me get 20 a game. Speaking of 20 a game and defense and all this kind of stuff, Kevin Durant plays some defense, plays some offense, does just a little bit of everything. And coming off of that injury, I was not expecting this at all.
No. When we first talked about it, and this is kind of the speculation that a lot of people were giving, is he going to be 80% of the guy that he was? Is he going to be, how long will it take him to get back to his rhythm? All those things. And we leaned into it pretty quickly. It was only a handful of episodes in the season where my co-host Doug and I, we were just like, no, he's back. That's it. And it was because he was showcasing every element of it. Initially we thought, well, maybe he won't drive as much early because the ankle and you're going to favor it, but he still has the length and size so he can rise up from the perimeter. He can find his mid-range game. No worries. But he showed it. He blew past guys going to the rim. He drove the baseline very early in the season. So all of a sudden we just had to kind of pivot and say, no, this dude is back. He's solid as far as the injury is concerned, and it's different. I know people they point to Kobe Bryant suffered that injury as well, similar injury a little bit later in his career. And it's a different era of basketball. The advances in treatment and, post game and injury rehab, all that stuff is different now. So I think you can look at those type of injuries and say, this isn't, are you going to be 80% of who you were? This is just a matter of how long will it take you to get back to that point.
Mid-range. I'm picking off a little bits and pieces that you're talking about because one thing that makes Kevin Durant very, very lethal and one of the best players in the NBA from early on in his career is his mid-range game. 3-pointers there, he can get to the basket, but the mid-range game seems to be a lost art in the league. And Kevin Durant, when defenders aren't used to guarding guys that are going to have a one-dribble pull-up or just rise to their face in the mid-range, Kevin Durant has it in his bag, and nobody – one, you can't stop it, but even if you could, nobody can even tries to figure out a way to stop that part of his game.
No, and it's funny because Kyrie Irving actually likes the mid-range game too.
He does.
He likes to lean into that. So when you end up with two players on the same team, you go, "Oh boy, is this going to be a problem for for us to have two guys that like that?" Luckily, when they're whatever one of the top 5 and one of the top 15 players in the league, you can get away with it. We looked at also early on in the season at Kevin Durant and where he catches the ball. So even on the perimeter, he holds that high up off his hip. So when you're talking about a guy, that has his size and his length, he's already kind of, let's say, a third of a way into his shooting motion. So your closeout time, your ability to get on top of him is even more limited. And the byproduct of that is if you try to close out on him early, he gets around you, gets into the mid-range game. And what I like, what I love about him is he's not committed then to, all right, I'm pot committed going to the rim. It's also, well, now if I've gotten past you and I've got that 4 feet between me and the big in the lane waiting for me, settle in, take the easy 2. So it's been interesting to watch that balance. And again, when you're one of the best players in the league, you can lean into that. When you are a guy that's a 3-point specialist, well, that's your role, that's your job. But there's value in it, man. So I talked before about getting out early on teams. Guess what? I know it's 2 points, 3 points. I get the math of it. But at the same time, if you have Kevin Durant just kind of casually, and I love the way he just works himself down into the lane. It's not a lot of effort for him to get that space, again, because of what your concerns are going both ways with him. So when you see mid-range jumpers just falling in with consistency over the first 10 minutes of a game, it all adds up, right? There is a carryover effect to that. And ultimately, we do know that 2-point shots, the percentages are in your favor there to make them over missing them. So unless you are a lethal 3-point team, those numbers can end up spreading the margin as you get underway in a game. So no, I love it. That early consistency from mid-range for him and for Kyrie as well. I prefer that Kyrie stay away from the perimeter shooting as much as he can, really get cooking there. I like it when he works into the lane. I like when he goes in off glass because he is a classic example of a guy. He does the shots that almost any other player in the league, you want the coach to bench him. But because it's Kyrie, and he makes more of those than not, you go, okay, great. Fantastic. We talked about this. We talked about it last year in the bubble with Tyler Johnson. He looks so much different this year now, but Tyler Johnson shoots those shots from the perimeter with all the confidence of a Kyrie Irving. And it is brick air ball and straight through the bucket, and that's the spectrum that you live in. And it's just so much narrower of a margin, successful margin when it's a Kyrie Irving.
The mid-range game, I am one person that loves mid-range basketball. If you can eliminate the 3-point shot as much as you can. It's going to be a factor. I mean, it's there. Not going to say eliminate it totally, completely. But if you can find a way to incorporate that more into your game as a team, you're going to be more successful more times than not. Yes, I understand the numbers. I know that maybe somebody says, I'm an analytics guy. Jay, 3 is more than 2 points. That's true. But a lot of the best players that are wing players in the NBA, even talking about like a Karl Malone or a Kevin Garnett who stretched the court a little bit, Chris Webber, these guys had Tim Duncan. These guys had a mid-range jumper, 15 to 18 foot, that wasn't in the block, that pulled that big man 4 or 5 away from the lane, and it opened up passing lanes, opened up areas for you to cut to get easier, more higher percentage shots inside the lane.
Well, that's the difference a little bit too. Now, you just saw on Saturday night when the Nets played the Mavericks, right? So Porzingis is in the game there. He's kind of had an up and down season a little bit, but the size matchup, you kind of knew it on paper. We mentioned Bruce Brown before. He's trying to D up Porzingis in the lane as he's backing him down. It's just, what are you asking of the poor man? But matchups have to dictate the way you approach your game plan. So to your point, like if you're a team that has a stretch big, so I mean, the Nets are a great example of this. DeAndre Jordan doesn't move out and defend the 3-pointer. I mean, he doesn't necessarily defend the lane that great, but we've also we've gone a little bit deeper on him and talked about this year specifically how the defense overall was finding its continuity. And there were times where it looks like, hey, what is DeAndre Jordan not doing in the lane? And it's really a byproduct of guys not on their switches, not getting over screens, etc. But if you're a team taking on Brooklyn, you look at DeAndre Jordan and say, well, this isn't a guy that extends out to defend the 3-point shot. So we're going to live on the perimeter a little bit more. But when you have defenders that fives that will come out to that place, to your point, well, that opens up the lane for you. So if you're not willing to punish a team when they extend out on a big at the top of the key, then you're never going to have those in your pocket later in the game, right? You need to establish it early, force them to collapse the defense a little bit, shade over, maybe flash to a couple of zones. And then if you have good ball rotation and movement on the outside, you're going to find perimeter shooters. You're going to punish them from there. And it's that constant back and forth, right? Sink them back into the lane, draw them out to the perimeter. If you can give those different looks, you can be effective. And ultimately, as much as everyone loves the 3-point game, and I get it, and it can take you from being down 15 to up 3 in the blink of an eye. Playoff time is still about defense. Things look different at that point, and size and length gets utilized very differently on the defensive end of the floor. If you can't blow past, if you can't settle into those mid-range shots, you're going to end up in long stretches, as we saw with Harden in Houston, where you're just chucking up 3 balls left and right every possession and hoping that you can find enough of a rhythm to get back into a game.
I'm curious. We're going to close out with this little thought here. I'm curious what you think. First-year coach Steve Nash, longtime NBA coach Mike D'Antoni is under him. How do you think D'Antoni, if at all, is assisting Nash in leading this team?
Oh, yeah, it's there for sure. I mean, listen, D'Antoni doesn't have anything really to prove as far as his coaching career goes. Yeah. He's done it in a lot of, obviously, in Houston, but even back when he had that small stint with the Knicks, he's been a very adaptable coach to what the NBA is and what the NBA dictates. So a guy like Bruce Brown is a great example, I think, of his influence there with Steve Nash of saying, hey, I just did this with PJ Tucker last year in Houston. And even though Bruce Brown's even smaller, the point is we can get position versatility here on this roster if we so choose. Early in the season, Steve Nash, listen, he had some timeout issues. The plays out of timeouts were not pretty. So I think there's been a lot of kind of baptism by fire. You know, you're going to get into the waters here. You're going to have some times where you're barely keeping your head above, but you're going to learn out of it. And I think D'Antoni leans into this opportunity and says, I've proven everything I need to. Now my legacy almost gets to be that I was the guy in the ear of Steve Nash. And you can even throw in Jacques Vaughn as well, retained by this team to work with the defense. So you have 2 veteran coaches that are there as resources. Steve Nash is a smart guy. He's regarded as one of the smarter basketball minds in his playing days. I don't think that he's there on the bench going, hey, fellas, you mind piping down? No. I know. Collective 30 years of NBA experience. Why don't you keep it down? I've got this all figured out. So he's relying on those resources, but I do think we will see as we get into the second half of this season after the All-Star break, you'll see more of his identity, more of his imprint. And though it may have been an active choice by Harden when he came over and realizing how to best play with this talent, think about what Steve Nash was, right? A great facilitator. I think that it's very easy to have those conversations with James Harden now and say, yeah, you can lean into this and look at what the byproduct is. You're still getting your offensive numbers and you're creating so much easy access for everybody else on this team.
So very true. Adam, this has been fun. Do you have any lasting comments about the Nets play so far, going throughout the rest of the season, playoff talk, anything about this Brooklyn team?
Listen, they're good. They're fun to watch. I mean, I don't want to break the bank here. They're fun. They're a good team. But what I will say is we didn't anticipate them being where they are right now in this season. You know, we talked about what's the record going to be by the end of the year. We didn't necessarily think that this was going to be a team that was going to worry about the regular season. Once you make the Harden trade, you get the Iron Man in there. It's the guy that doesn't miss games. So now all of a sudden you do look at it a little bit differently. That West Coast trip that they came off of, where they beat the Clippers, where they beat the Lakers, took care of also the Phoenix Suns in Arizona. That was the sample size. And that's really what we've been asking for is just show me. Show me that you can do it on both ends of the floor against some of the better teams in the league, and then I'm good basically until the playoffs. And in the Eastern Conference, name me a team that's going to bother the Nets in the first round. So that's where it stands right now. There's still plenty to learn about this team, but it's just fun, man. So much of after the All-Star break is just going to kind of be like, yes, sir. Thank you for another one. So we don't want to get overconfident just yet, but it's hard not to, man. All we need to see now is Kevin Durant back from the little hamstring tweak and, everybody healthy and cool, but it's great. It's a great time to be covering them, obviously.
Are you saying that there's a chance they win the championship? I'm going like down the road on purpose because someone not right listening may be like, well, Nets, he's saying that they're fun, they're exciting, they have all this talent. Are you saying championship or just what? Oh,
they're the team out of the East.
Okay.
Even if you look at Philadelphia, that's a matchup that the Nets can exploit. Right. Yeah. Embiid is a phenomenally talented guy. He's going to be in the MVP runnings, obviously, but that's a team that the Nets can exploit. As it stands right now, the Nets are the team to beat out of the East. And then you get to the finals and you're going to be talking about who are you facing? One of the teams I think you have to at least now, I'm sure everyone is, but Is anyone really now talking about Utah as being the team to beat in the West? They're doing it in the standings, but everyone still seems to be saying, well, the Clippers or the Lakers, that's who's going to be there. If Utah is there, that's a different type of matchup. And but again, name a team that has Kyrie Irving, Harden, and KD that can match that talent level and could beat you for 4 out of 7 games. I just don't know if right now in this moment I can see that.
Adam, this has been fun. And once again, let everyone know where they can check you out on social media and also check out the shows you do as well.
Yes, sir. At Locked On Nets on Twitter by the same name in the podcast landscape. Myself and Doug Norrie breaking it down. Follow Adam Armbrecht. Follow Doug Norrie. We're always talking about sports and basketball in general. The One Giant podcast. You can follow that as well. Get it wherever you listen to podcasts. That's it. No shameless plugs here for me, man. It's a pleasure, man. I really enjoyed it. So hopefully I get invited back.
Absolutely. As long as your team keeps winning, the Brooklyn Nets, that is, the team you cover, as long as they win, we'll gladly have you back, Adam. Man, I'll gladly have you back down the road. It's just fun. I love talking basketball. I love talking basketball and sports with people that are fun like yourself. Great connection there. Probably have you back down the road, man. Adam, thank you so much for coming on here, the JC Podcast.
Thank you, sir.